At the base of Mount Fuji, in the Yamanashi Prefecture of Japan, there is a forest called Aokigahara. It is 30 square kilometers of dense ancient woodland. Twisted trees. Moss-covered lava rock. Caves that stay frozen year-round. One of the most ecologically remarkable forests in all of Japan. And for the last 6 decades, it has also been the place where thousands of people have gone to disappear. Not to hike. Not to sightsee. To disappear. This is the story of Aokigahara, the Sea of Trees. And I want to tell it to you carefully. Because this is a story that deserves to be told carefully. It is a story about a place, yes. But it is also a story about loneliness. About the specific shape of despair that a forest can represent to people who have run out of other options. And about what it means when a landscape becomes so deeply associated with death that the association itself becomes part of the pull. Let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome back. Okay, so before I take you into the forest itself, I need to build the picture from the very beginning. Because Aokigahara is not just a location that acquired a dark reputation. It is a place whose entire physical existence, its geology, its silence, its disorientation, seems almost designed to hold whatever enters it. And to understand why it became what it became, you need to understand what it is first. We go back to the year 864 AD. Mount Fuji erupted. Not a small eruption, this was one of the 3 largest eruptions in Fuji's recorded history. The Jogan eruption, as historians call it, sent massive rivers of basaltic lava flowing northwest down the mountain slopes. The lava spread across the landscape for days, burying villages, filling in a large lake called Lake Tsunami and splitting it into the 2 lakes that exist today, Lake Sai and Lake Shoji. What was left behind when the lava cooled was a vast field of fractured, porous, iron-rich basalt. 30 square kilometers of hardened volcanic rock, nutrient-poor and almost completely inhospitable to life. For centuries, almost nothing grew on it. Then, slowly, over hundreds of years, the forest began. Lichens first. Then mosses. Then, eventually, trees. But the trees of Aokigahara grew differently from trees in ordinary soil. Because there is almost no soil. The roots could not go downward into the rock. So they went sideways. They spread horizontally across the lava surface, gripping whatever fissures and crevices they could find, wrapping around each other, creating a tangle of exposed roots across the forest floor that looks, and this is something every visitor mentions, like something living that is holding onto the earth rather than growing from it. The canopy grew dense. So dense that from above, Aokigahara looks like a single solid surface, a sea of trees, which is what its other name, Jukai, actually means. The canopy blocks the wind. It blocks the light. Inside the forest, it is always twilight, even at midday in full summer. And it does something else, something that shapes every experience of the forest from the moment you step off the paved paths and into the trees. It blocks the sound. The silence of Aokigahara is not the silence of a quiet day. It is something else. Something that people consistently struggle to describe and consistently try to describe anyway. The porous lava beneath the forest floor absorbs sound the way a sponge absorbs water. Footsteps disappear. Voices don't carry. The wind moves the highest branches but does not seem to descend into the forest below the canopy. Animals exist in Aokigahara, foxes, deer, bears, dozens of bird species, but you rarely hear them. The forest feels, to almost every visitor who steps into it, genuinely and deeply silent in a way that no other forest they have experienced has been. This silence has a physical explanation. But it has a psychological effect that goes beyond physics. Human beings are deeply responsive to silence. We are social animals. We evolved in a world full of sound. When sound disappears, really disappears, at a level beyond what we normally experience, something in the nervous system responds. Some people find it peaceful. Some find it profoundly unsettling. And some people, in specific states of mind, find in that silence something they have been looking for, a feeling of distance from the world, of being already somewhere outside of ordinary life. The iron-rich basalt beneath the forest also interferes with compasses. If you place a compass directly on the lava rock, the needle will stutter and spin, aligning with the local magnetic field of the rock rather than pointing north. GPS weakens under the dense canopy. Cell phone signals fade. And visually, the forest presents an extraordinary challenge to orientation. The trees grow in dense, repeating patterns. Every direction looks the same. There are no clearings to establish landmarks. No gradient of light to indicate where the sun is. People who step off the marked trails have been found days later less than 200 meters from the path, unable to locate it. The forest holds on to whatever enters it. Not by supernatural means. By geology, by topology, by the specific visual and acoustic properties of a forest that grew on a lava field 1200 years ago. But the effect is the same. Now. The mythology. Aokigahara has been considered spiritually dangerous in Japanese tradition for a long time. Long before any modern crisis, long before any novel or book or media coverage, the forest had a reputation as a place where the dead did not rest easily. In Japanese tradition, yurei are the spirits of people who died in states of great suffering, anger, or grief, people whose deaths were violent or sudden or unresolved. They cannot pass on. They remain attached to the place where the thing happened, or to the person who wronged them, or simply to the world they cannot leave. They are not peaceful presences. In the folklore of the region around Mount Fuji, Aokigahara has been associated with yurei for centuries. The forest's silence, which the people who named it had no geological framework to explain, was interpreted as the silence of the dead. The twisted roots, the perpetual twilight, the disorientation that caused people to enter and not return, all of it was legible in terms of spirits. There is also the story of Ubasut. The word means, roughly, abandoning the old woman. It refers to an old practice, historically documented in Japan, though the extent to which it occurred is debated, in which, during times of extreme famine, elderly family members who could no longer be fed were carried to remote places and left to die. Whether Ubasut was specifically practiced in Aokigahara, or whether the forest simply became associated with the practice through the logic of its landscape, remote, silent, disorienting, unlikely to give up its dead, is not definitively established. But the association exists in the folklore of the region. And the yurei of those left to die in the forest, in this tradition, are particularly restless. Particularly hostile. They do not want you there. And they do not want to let you leave. This is the forest before any of the modern story. A place already considered by the people who lived near it to be somewhere the living should be careful about entering. A place where the boundary between the living world and whatever lies beyond it was understood to be thinner than usual. The modern story begins in the 1950s. Accounts of bodies discovered in Aokigahara date to at least the mid-1950s. Something about the forest, its remoteness, its silence, its capacity to absorb whatever entered it without giving it back, had begun to attract people who intended never to leave. Then, in 1960, a Japanese author named Saicho Matsumoto published a novel. The title is translated variously as Tower of Waves and Black Sea of Trees. Matsumoto was one of the most popular writers in Japan, a novelist of extraordinary influence whose work sold in millions. In this novel, the story ends with a pair of star-crossed lovers who cannot be together walking into Aokigahara to die. The effect of this ending on the forest's association with death was significant and immediate. Matsumoto's novel was enormously read, enormously discussed, and adapted repeatedly for film and television. The image of lovers walking into the forest as a final act of romantic tragedy, a specifically Japanese literary tradition with deep cultural roots going back centuries, embedded Aokigahara as the destination in the popular imagination of an entire country. By the 1970s, the bodies found in the forest each year had become a significant enough problem that annual search operations were organized. Since 1970, local officials, police, volunteers, and sometimes journalists have conducted formal searches of the forest floor every year. The searches are necessary because the forest is so dense that a person can be less than 100 meters from a trail and remain completely invisible. The searches are not complete, the forest is too large and too dense, but they find what they find. Tens of bodies. Every year. In 2003, 105 bodies were found in the forest. In 1993, a book was published in Japan that made everything worse. Wataru Tsurumi published The Complete Manual of Suicide. The book sold more than 1 million copies in its first year. It provided explicit descriptions of methods. It assessed each method matter-of-factly. And one chapter described Aokigahara as, in its words, the perfect place to die. The book included directions to the forest. It recommended specific areas where a person was less likely to be found. It said, directly, that your body will not be found. You will become a missing person and slowly disappear from people's memory. Copies of this book have since been found on the bodies of people who died in the forest. The Japanese government stopped releasing specific annual statistics for deaths in Aokigahara after this, a decision made deliberately, based on research showing that publicizing numbers can create a contagion effect, particularly when a site has already achieved the cultural weight that Aokigahara had. The last widely documented year is 2003, when 105 bodies were found. The government's position is that releasing the numbers encourages more people to come. So we don't fully know how many people have died there. The estimates are in the thousands since records began. Somewhere between 30 and 100 per year in recent decades. The exact number has been deliberately obscured. Now I want to talk about something that I think is the most important part of this story. The part that gets lost in most coverage of Aokigahara. The part that I think, if you leave this video knowing only one thing about this place, this is the thing I'd want it to be. The people who went to Aokigahara were not pulled there by supernatural forces. They were not under a spell. The Urei did not reach out from the trees and compel them. They were people who were suffering. People who were in pain of a specific, understandable, human kind, the pain of financial ruin, of broken relationships, of isolation, of mental illness that had not been adequately treated or even acknowledged. People who arrived at a point where they could not see any other direction. Japan has long had one of the highest suicide rates among developed nations. In 2015, the rate was 15.4 deaths per 100,000 people, significantly higher than the United States, significantly higher than the United Kingdom, higher than most of comparable Europe. The reasons are complex and contested. Economic pressure. A cultural context in which seeking mental health support carries significant stigma. A tradition in which self-chosen death has historically been understood as a dignified response to unbearable circumstances rather than a failure of character. The economic collapse of the 1990s, Japan's lost decade, produced a generation of young people who entered the workforce into a landscape of broken promises, and suicides increased sharply. The 2008 global financial crisis caused a 15% rise in Japan's suicide numbers. Suicides increase throughout Japan every March, the end of the fiscal year, the month when layoffs are formalized and debts come due. What Dr. Yoshitomo Takahashi, a Japanese psychiatrist who interviewed survivors of Aokigahara suicide attempts, found in his research was this: many people who went to the forest chose it specifically because they believed their deaths would go unnoticed. They believed that they would be able to die successfully without being noticed. Some were afraid that dying closer to home would cause pain and inconvenience to people they loved. Some were drawn by the knowledge that others had died there, not to copy them, but to be somehow with them. The forest offered a specific kind of terrible comfort: you will not die alone. Others have come here before you. You will be among people who understood. That is a devastating thought. It is also a completely human one. What does the forest look like to those who enter it? People who have gone into Aokigahara, for many reasons, not only the darkest ones, describe it consistently. The silence comes first. Then the light, how immediately the canopy closes above and the ordinary daylight becomes something muted and green. The root systems across the floor, the way you have to watch your feet on the lava rock, the way the terrain is constantly uneven and occasionally drops away into the mouths of lava tubes beneath. The moss that covers everything, every rock, every exposed root, in a layer of extraordinary vivid green that makes the forest, on its own terms, beautiful. Genuinely beautiful. At the forest entrance, signs have been placed in both Japanese and English. One of them reads, "Your life is a precious gift from your parents. Quietly think once more about your parents, siblings, or children. Please don't suffer alone and first reach out." A telephone number for a crisis line is printed at the bottom. Volunteers and forestry workers patrol the forest. Security cameras have been installed at the main entrance. In the building near the forest's edge, there is a room kept specifically for the bodies brought back from the searches. There are 2 beds in that room. One for the body. One for a person to sleep beside it. Because, in the belief that runs through Japanese traditional understanding of the forest, a spirit left alone will not rest. Someone has to be there. Even in the most practical, secular interpretation, something in that detail feels right. The body should not be alone. Whatever the tradition that produced that practice, its instinct is a human one: the dead deserve company. They deserve someone present. There have been attempts, ongoing, imperfect, important, to change the association between the forest and death. Musicians have played at the entrance. Volunteers have walked the trail speaking gently to people they find there who appear to have come for the darkest reasons. Calls to prevent suicide in Japan have produced government commitments to reduce the national rate. And in recent years, though official statistics remain suppressed, there are indications that the rate of deaths in Aokigahara may be declining, in part because of these efforts, in part because of the shift in cultural conversation around mental health in Japan. The forest itself continues. The ancient trees that grew from lava 1200 years ago are still there. The silence is still there. The twisted roots and the moss and the lava caves and Mount Fuji visible through clearings in the canopy are still there. Aokigahara is still one of the most ecologically remarkable places in Japan. People hike there every week, not for dark reasons, but because it is extraordinary and beautiful. The Narusawa Ice Cave and the Fugaku Wind Cave, lava tube formations within the forest, draw tens of thousands of visitors a year for perfectly ordinary tourism. The forest is not only one thing. It never was. The question I started with, what pulls people there, and what do those who enter actually find, doesn't have a single answer. Some find it beautiful and leave unchanged except for the specific quality of silence that stays with you after. Some find it frightening in ways they can't entirely explain. Some have gone there in the worst moments of their lives and come back. Sometimes because of a sign on a trail. Sometimes because of a volunteer who appeared at exactly the right moment. Sometimes just because something in them, standing in that silence, in that extraordinary ancient place, found, at the last possible moment, a reason. And some have not come back. The forest does not choose between them. It is a forest. It grew on fire. It made its own soil from nothing. It created an ecosystem out of fractured lava. It has been standing, in its strange and silent way, for 1200 years. And it will be there long after the associations that the last 60 years have laid upon it, long after every book and documentary and news story and YouTube video, have faded into whatever the next 1200 years will bring. Okay guys. That is the story of Aokigahara, the Sea of Trees. Before I go, I want to say something directly. This is a story about a place. But it's also a story about people who were suffering. If anything in this video resonated in a way that goes beyond curiosity, if you're carrying something that has made this story feel personally close, please reach out. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in the US is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by calling or texting 988. If you're outside the US, the International Association for Suicide Prevention maintains a directory of crisis centers at iasb.info/resources/crisis_centers. You don't have to be alone with it. If you're here because you find this stuff as fascinating as I do, drop me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the forest's association with death? About the role that books and media play in shaping a place's reputation? About what it means for a landscape to carry that kind of weight? I read every single comment, and this is one of those stories where I genuinely want to know what you think. Hit the like button if this video was worth your time. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Turn on notifications. And I'll see you in the next one.